telling us to add to our faith for more than 20 years. He's been telling us to walk in the light as he is in the light for more than 20 years. He's been telling us to be anxious for nothing for more than 20 years. He's been telling us to seek first the kingdom for more than 20 years. He's been telling us to pray without ceasing for more than 20 years. He's been telling us to walk by faith and not by sight for more than 20 years. He's been telling us to count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations for more than 20 years. He's been telling us to make our calling and election sure for more than 20 years. God had reached his limit with Israel. Their rebellion and deeds provoked God's anger. And God sent an unlikely servant to execute wrath against the people, the land, and the nations. For the Lord sent the king of Babylon to utterly destroy them and make them an astonishment. He would remove all of the evidences of joy and gladness, for the whole land would become a desolation, and they would serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. As we look at the text, I want us to see, first of all, the devastating siege. Verses 1 through 5, we have this historic account of the siege that was coming against Jerusalem. For it was not a friendly visit from Babylon. They are not sightseeing. This was not a tour to see Solomon's great temple. There was no interest in signing a peace treaty. The king of Babylon would never be considered for a Nobel Peace Prize because he was a man of war. This was not a one-day, a one-week, or a one-month event. The siege would start in King Zedekiah's 9th year and was not completed until his 14th year. For this, first the king of Babylon and all of his army came against the capital city of Jerusalem. For the king of Babylon and his great army encamped against Jerusalem. Initially, when Babylon came against Jerusalem, Egypt, their neighbors, came to assist them. But Egypt wasn't going to stay there forever. And when Egypt came, Babylon backed off. But when Egypt went back home, the Babylonians came back. It was during this time that King Zedekiah asked Jeremiah to pray to the Lord on our behalf. And the Lord's response was that Pharaoh is going back to Egypt, and the Chaldeans are coming back, and they're going to take this city and they are going to burn it with fire. While the siege is on hold, Jeremiah leaves Jerusalem and goes back home to the land of Benjamin. He attempts to go in order to claim his property among his people. When the captain of the guard saw Jeremiah leaving, he seized him and charged him with defecting to the Chaldeans or the Babylonians. This would lead to Jeremiah's arrest, his torture, and his imprisonment. Are you hearing me this morning? For during this imprisonment, something interesting happens. King Zedekiah brings Jeremiah out secretly to his own house, and he says to the prophet, "Is there any word from the Lord?" Now, there was a word from the Lord, but Zedekiah didn't like it. Because the word was that the king of Babylon is coming back, and he's going to take the city. The Chaldeans made a common and powerful military move. It's the same thing that Major General Ulysses S. Grant did at Vicksburg, Mississippi in May of 1863 during the Civil War. For he sieged the city of Vicksburg. He shut the city down. Nobody could come in and nobody could go out. All he had to do was wait for the city to fall apart, and then he would go in and take the city. This is the same thing that the Babylonians did. They built a siege wall all around Jerusalem. Then the king of Babylon built a siege wall all around Jerusalem's wall. In doing this, they shut the city down. They sent the city into economic depression. This prevented trading. No one could bring foods and goods into or out of the city. This was before the information age technology. Jerusalem Jerusalem. Jeremiah would be appointed a piece of daily bread from Baker Street until it was all gone. This was a devastating siege. Jerusalem would ultimately fall. In Zedekiah's 11th year, the 4th month and the 9th day of the month, the enemy penetrated the city. They broke through the walls of Jerusalem. The princes of Babylon then sat in the middle gate. Zedekiah the king did not stay and fight. The king and all his men of war fled from the city by night. The Babylonians then pursued them. Zedekiah was separated from his army. They caught King Zedekiah. They took him to the king of Babylon. They pronounced judgment on Zedekiah. They killed Zedekiah's sons before his eyes. They put his eyes out. They bound him with bronze fetters and took him off to Babylon. The siege led to the fall of that great city, Jerusalem. Chaldeans, the Babylonians